Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good break and that you are kind of rest up from from having a week off. So we will resume with our lecture 6 today, which is the nervous system part 2. Um, just a reminder, there is going to be a quiz on Wednesday for lecture 5. And that is the action potential stuff and the neurotransmitter communication. So make sure you take the time to prepare for that. I think I already posted the information on that on eCentennial. Let me just double check quickly here. Um, so I know that you have the most up-to-date information.
It says only 35 minutes, Professor.
It says it's only 35 minutes. Yeah, I can make it longer if it makes you guys feel a bit better. Okay, I'll change it to like 45 or something. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me just do that right now before I forget.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. It's pretty straightforward. I think this particular it's pretty short. It's only out of 24. And let me just change the time to 45. And I really think you should have that graph that we spend quite a bit of time working on in class with you, uh, so that you're able to look at it as quick reference. All right. So that's going to be on Wednesday. Of course, we also have regular class on Wednesday as well. Okay, so let's get to it. Before the break, we were talking about the structure of the spinal cord, and we drew a diagram on it. Let me see if I have it here in the study guide. Right? There is a picture of a slice of the spinal cord, and let me just quickly go through it with you in case you need a refresher. When you touch a hot surface, for example, the sensory information will be carried through the afferent pathway, shown here in blue, which is made up of the sensory neurons, right? So the sensory neuron is responsible for uh, carrying sensory information such as temperature, pain, touch, pressure, right? All these sensory information from your skin, from muscle, is going to be able to travel through the afferent pathway, and it's typically going to enter through the back end of the spinal cord. And it's going to make a connection with an interneuron, and these interneurons are only found within the brain or the spinal cord. It's only found within the central nervous system. And their job is to analyze the sensory information and decide what the appropriate motor outcome is. And then it's going to relay that information through the motor neurons, okay, forming the efferent pathway, and it exits at the front. And then it's going to go to an effector. Okay? The effector can be a muscle, it can be a gland, it can be an organ, okay, which is going to basically carry out that motor function um, in response to whatever the stimulus was. Okay, in this case, if you touch the hot surface, then the appropriate response would be to remove your hand, right? And the afferent pathway and the efferent pathway actually gets bundled together into a single bundle, okay? And we call that the spinal nerves. Right? So if you think about your spinal cord coming down, you will have a total of 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and they just kind of exit on the side of your backbone. There's a little opening on the side of the backbone that allows these spinal nerves to come out. I'll show you a picture of that later on. And at the same time that the signal is relaying to the interneuron here, the signal actually split, and it's going to be traveling up the spinal cord through these ascending track. Okay, so the ascending track carries sensory information up the spinal cord, usually at the back, and it's going to take it to the brain. I haven't told you where it goes at the brain yet. We'll learn that today. And then the brain is going to further process these information. The spinal cord, it's more for like reflex type of response, okay? But the brain is responsible for higher order processing, right? Like, do we need to, run the hand under under cold water? Do we need to, blow on it? Do we need to, put some ointment on or something? All that higher process thinking involves the brain, okay? But by the time that you are thinking about all these things, the important thing is your hand is already off the hot stove or whatever it was, right? That's why the reflex is immediate response to get you out of the dangerous situation, in this case, the burning stove. And then the brain will do, stuff that comes later. Yeah. And the information, whatever you need to do, is going to come down through the descending tract, okay, which is going to come down at the front of the spinal cord, and then it exits at the appropriate location, right, to the arms, right? Maybe in the case of the other example where you were driving and then you see the rabbit crossing the street or something, then you might have to tell your hand to turn away as well. So depending on the action, depending on what is required to be done, then the motor neuron is going to exit a different portion of the spinal cord, right? So back to the notes here. This is a slice of the spinal cord. You will always see the butterfly in the center. It's kind of like an upside down butterfly, I told you. And that's the gray matter in the center. And the gray matter is on the inside of the spinal cord, whereas for the brain, the gray matter is on the outside, right? And in case you forgot, gray matter is made up of cell bodies primarily, and they are for thinking. Okay, thinking, analyzing information. Whereas the white matter is made up of the myelinated axons, right? They are axons that have a waxy coating that goes around them that helps you speed up the signal transmission speed. And white matter, instead of doing thinking, it's responsible for transmission. Okay. So located at the back here, at the back end, the bottom of the butterfly is the back, right? So this is where you will find the ascending track. Okay. It's going to be like coming out of the computer screen, right? Like towards the head. The head is, it's like we're looking at this spinal cord from the top. Okay, so the head is like out of the screen, if you would, right? And the legs would be like behind the screen. And over here, this is where you will have the anterior portion, and that's where you will have the descending tract, carrying motor information. And I told you on the side here is a bit of a mixed bag, okay? And there's some going up, some going down. It really depends on which section of the spinal cord you're looking at. Okay. And just to put everything into perspective for you again, the sensory neuron is going to be coming in at the back. And the blue one is the sensory neuron. And then you're going to have your interneuron right here. And the, I don't think I have pink here. I'll just use red. It's going to come out here like that. Okay, so any questions about the organization of the spinal cord, like what goes where, and other things? Okay. Don't forget that there is a little hole here in the middle. That is the central canal. That's where the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid, it's going to go through all the way until it gets to the bottom. Right? Now, this is another view of the organization of the spinal cord, kind of like a transverse view. But up here, this is a frontal section of the brain. Okay, whereas all these are kind of like sideways cuts. Okay, but when you get to the top here, it's like you cut it this way. It separates in the front and back. So I already reviewed with you that the sensory information is going to come in at the back, and sure, it's going to form the reflex arc, but at the same time, it's going to go up, right? It's going to go up through the ascending tract, and it's not a single neuron that goes up. Okay, there are a couple of relay point. That's why it says first neuron, second neuron, right? And then there's a third neuron. But the point is, it forms an ascending tract. And somewhere along the way, when we get to the brain stem, you might remember the medulla oblongata from the respiratory system. If you don't remember, that's okay. I'll label it with you again later. But at the medulla oblongata, that's where 90% of these tracks are going to cross the middle. Right? So they're going to go to the other side before continuing to go up. Okay, it's going to go through the midbrain, and eventually it's going to get to a structure called thalamus, which we will talk about later, and then it's going to end up somewhere in the brain. Okay? So we haven't done anything related to the brain yet. Right? There are various structures that you have to pass through, and they all do different things. But the point is, it's going to go up, it's going to cross the middle, it's going to end up on the other side of the brain. So if you burn your right hand, that signal is going to end up on your left brain. If you burn your left hand, then that signal is going to end up on your right brain. Right? So this blue path here shows the ascending tract. Consists of sensory information located at the posterior white matter, whereas descending tract is opposite, carries motor information, right? I hope this makes sense. Okay, next slide. The spinal cord is separated into different sections. Let me just go back to this slide to show you. For example, in the neck region, we call them C, C1 to C8. C stands for cervical, okay? Cervical. You don't really have to know what it stands for at this time, okay? So C is at the top, followed by T. T is thoracic. In the chest area, you have 12 pairs. And then further down, you have the lumbar. You can see here, it really starts to become the ponytail, right? It's really fraying out, and that's where you receive the epidural, right? That's where you will be doing the spinal tap if you want to get a sample of the cerebrospinal fluid, right? To, for example, see if someone has meningitis, right? So you can stick the needle in here. And then further down, we have like the sacral nerve. Okay, so cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral. It's just the different sections. And in this picture, it's trying to show you how the percentage of white matter and gray matter changes as you go down the spinal cord. Right? So you have a lot more white matter near the top of the spinal cord than, say, something further down. Right? So these things, they have less white matter. And why is that the case? I'll try to explain this to you with a picture. Sometimes it's confusing, but I'll try. Okay, so let's say this is the brain, right? You don't really have to draw this. Once you understand it, you don't really need the diagram. And this is the brain. And we know we have a bunch of tracks that are going down. We have a bunch of tracks that are going down. And then we also have a bunch of tracks that are coming up. Okay, so these ascending and descending tracks, they are the white matter, right? Okay, so I don't want to make this too confusing, so I'm just going to stick with the ones that are coming down, and this is going to be in the spinal cord. And what happens is, let's say this is where the hand is, and so when the descending track gets to the hand, it's going to have to exit, right, to control the hand, right, to control the hand. These will continue to go down. Okay, but maybe some of it needs to go to the chest, you know, like for the breathing muscle or something. And so that's going to exit. That's going to exit. And then you will go further down, right? These goes to the legs or something. So if you take a slice of spinal cord here, slice of spinal cord, the C section, cervical section, the neck, look at how many red lines there are. The red lines that are tracked, right? That's the white matter. You have a bunch of the white matter here because they haven't exited the spinal cord yet. The further down you go, right, let's say you go all the way down here to like the lumbar section, right? A lot of the tracks have exit already, right? They went to the hand, they went to the chest, they went to the hip, right? By the time you get to the bottom, you have very few tracks that are still on their way to the legs or something. Okay? And that's why the percentage of white matter, which essentially are the tracks, are going to be much lower when you take it from a bottom section of the spinal cord. Okay? So like if I show you a slice like this and I say, you know, where do you think this is from? Is it from higher up like the C, middle, or bottom? If you see a lot of white matter, it's going to be from the cervical section. If you see very little white matter like this guy, it's going to be further down in the spinal cord. Do you have any question? Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I didn't get why the higher, like a C8 has a more than white matter to L4.
Okay. So this, again, this is from the neck area, right? This is from the neck area. And at that point, if you look at my drawing, you see we still have all the tracks that are trying to get to their places. Okay, it's trying to get to the hand, but we're not yet at the hand. Okay? And then, you know, we have some that try to go to different parts of the body. All of them are still, they haven't branched out yet. So it's really, really thick.
I got it.
Okay.
I got it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor, the gray matter is the same all the cross?
Gray matter is pretty consistent. I mean, there are some subtle variation, but they are not exiting or anything like that, right? So, you know, it remains relatively consistent. Okay.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah.
Is the
Patricia?
spinal cord the same size from C1 all the way to S3 as in diameter?
That's a very
Good
good
point.
question. It's I know it doesn't really quite look like it that way. It's relatively consistent, but it tapers off. It's more like I wouldn't say it's a cylinder, but it kind of tapers off a little bit until it becomes the ponytail at the end. Okay, so
Okay.
it's more like you know, like more like this is an
So
exaggeration.
it
Okay.
decreases as it goes down.
Yeah, something like that. And then it becomes
Is that why too we have more of the white matter?
that's
Uh,
another reason, yeah. But the like I said, right? Because as more of them exit, it gets thinner and thinner, right? I don't know, like do you guys know that snack with the the cheese? Like my kids like to eat that thing, the cheese, and then they peel the cheese off and eat it. If you know what I'm talking about, it's kind of like that. Okay, the more you peel out, the thinner it gets, right? So when the nerve are exiting, you know, it gets thinner and thinner. in terms of the white matter. Okay, the point is this, okay? If I show you a slice on the test, you should know. You should know what slice is. I'm not gonna be like tricky and you know the answer is gonna be like, you know, in the middle or something, okay? I'm gonna show you something obvious, something that's like, you know, either at the very top or at the very bottom. Okay. All right, let's talk about reflex. Reflexes are automatic response to stimulation, some kind of trigger. Okay, the reflex has to be triggered by something. It's not gonna happen on its own. Okay, it shouldn't happen on its own. And once you have the right trigger, the right stimulation, the response is going to be automatic, and these are things that are hardwired into the body. You're born with the ability to do some of these reflexes. Okay, you don't have to learn it. There is no conscious thought involved. Usually it happens, and then you will realize, oh, that was a reflex, right? After it has happened. So there are some reflexes that involves the brain directly. We call those cranial reflexes. There are some reflexes that involves the spinal cord only, and we call those spinal reflexes. So example of cranial reflexes would be things like salivation. Okay? This is particularly true when you are hungry. Okay, you're hungry and you smell good food, you salivate. Okay, if you imagine something sour, like right now, think of like a really sour lemon or lime or something citrusy, you might salivate a little bit as well. Okay, so that's a reflex. Okay, it's a way to prepare for eating, right? Essentially, sneezing is another reflex. You know, if something is tickling your nose, as a reflex, you sneeze it out. There are other reflexes that involves the brain as well. For example, if someone goes up to you and then, you know, try to pretend to hit you with their hand, okay, what do? You blink and you move back, right? That's a cranial reflex. Okay. Swallowing is another cranial reflex. And nobody taught the baby how to swallow. They are born with the ability to swallow. So all these are involving the brain only. The spinal reflex involves only the spinal cord. Okay, perhaps the most common one is like the knee jerk reflex. You must have seen it, you know, in cartoons. It's very common, right? The knee jerk reflex is, you know, you have a doctor that have a little hammer, and then they tap on. There's something called the patella tendon, which kind of tape your kneecap to the knee, and when you tap on that gently, the leg is gonna move forward involuntarily. Yeah, so you know these reflexes, if they're performing properly, then we know your spinal cord is intact. Okay, but if some of these reflexes are not working, then it's an indication that there might be spinal cord injury. Pinprick reflex. It sounds more complicated than it really is, but it's just like if you accidentally touch a sharp thing, then your hand automatically moves back, right? It doesn't work when you do it deliberately. Like, you know, if I have something sharp and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna touch it. Like, you know, if you're preparing for it, then the reflex is not gonna kick in. It's only something that will happen when you know, when you're not aware that it's gonna be occurring. So cranial reflex involves the brain only. Spinal reflex involves the spinal cord only. Nothing too complicated here. I would say it's pretty standard stuff. Okay, so this shows the knee jerk reflex. You tap on the patella tendon, and then there are some detectors here, which we're not going to go into, but it's going to go to the spinal cord. And in this case, there are actually two motor neurons that are coming out. The red one is going to cause your quadricep, okay, quadricep, which is like your, you know, the front of your leg, right? That muscle to contract. But in order for the leg to move forward, you must also send a signal to your hamstring and tell it to relax. Okay, so if you still remember those neurotransmitter stuff that I taught you about, then the red path here is going to be carrying some excitatory neurotransmitter telling the hamstring, the quadricep to contract. And then the purple one here is going to be carrying some inhibitory neurotransmitter telling the hamstring to relax. If both muscle contract at the same time, then the foot is locked, right? It's not going to move anywhere. So you need one to contract and the other to relax. And so I know in class I show you pathways that are very linear, right? Just one single loop, but in reality it's very complicated. They split out into different paths, you know, causing some things to turn on and some things to turn off in order to produce the desired result. So that's the knee-jerk reflex. There's something called a Babinski reflex. You know, if you have a baby lying around at home, this is something you could try on them. You can take like a back end of a pen or pencil, and you stroke the bottom of the feet like this, okay? And you will notice as a reflex, their toes are going to be fanning out like that. Okay, it's going to be fanning out like that. And that's called the Babinski reflex. It's supposed to be happening for infants and up to 2 years old, and then it disappears. Okay. When the Babinski reflex happens in an adult, if you do this to the bottom of the feet of an adult, and then their toes fan out like this, if they still have the Babinski reflex, then that is often a sign of some kind of CNS disorder. Okay, so we don't want to see this in adults. So some reflex, it goes away when you grow up, right? Another example of a reflex that goes away is the grasp reflex. Okay? If I put my finger into a baby's hand, right, what do? If you ever done that before, they grab onto it, right? They grab onto it. But adults, like, you know, if I put my finger into your hand, right, like, you're like, what are you doing, right? Probably gonna lose my job too. But you know, the reflex is gonna go away when we grow up. Yeah? Not everything stays, right? Some reflex are no longer we're no longer useful, right? When you grow up. So that's it. Okay, let's see if you were paying attention, huh? What information are carried in ascending track? Let's do a poll here. See if you guys are more enthusiastic about the pose after the break. Okay, not bad. The ascending tracks, that's the blue one I keep on drawing. They go up at the back of the spinal cord and they carry sensory information. Ascending track carries sensory information to the brain. Let's do another one here. And this one is a lot more involved. I'll let you read that. I'll be right back. Okay, I think I'm going to end the polls here. Thank you for those who have participated. We are looking for the true statement here. So let's see, we're talking about the spinal cord. Nobody chose A, which is good because gray matter is not on the periphery, right? Periphery means on the side. The gray matter is the butterfly, and that is at the center. Ascending tract are generally located at the anterior side. No, it's usually located at the posterior side, on the back. Go up at the back. Motor neuron emerges at the posterior side. No, it emerges from the anterior side. Okay, basically, I'm asking you about this diagram, right? I am asking you about this diagram. Okay, look, the motor neuron, it's coming out from the front. It's emerging. Emerging means coming out, right? From the front. A white matter forms a butterfly shape in the center. Nope, it is the gray matter. The gray matter. The gray matter contains interneuron, the green thing, as well as portion of sensory and motor neuron. That's correct. That's the correct one. Let's take a closer look here. Okay, gray matter is the butterfly you see. Let me zoom in for you. Okay. So the interneuron is in the gray matter entirely. The motor neuron, therefore, has to go inside the butterfly and make a synaptic connection with it, right? So that's why there is a portion of the sensory neuron in the gray matter. Similar story, the interneuron has to make a synaptic connection with the motor neuron. And so part of the motor neuron must be in the butterfly, must be in the gray matter. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. Any last minute question before we proceed to the brain, which gets even more complicated? So the brain is really like there's a lot of stuff, like the nervous system in general. So it's normal to feel a little bit, more overwhelmed than usual, I suppose. Anything at all? All right, well, if you think of anything, feel free to pop it in chat for me. So, brain anatomy. So we're gonna be labeling all of these things later on, but let's just go through some of the stuff that we should all be familiar with at this point. We've learned about it before the break, and we're just gonna refresh our memory a little bit. Okay, so here we can see the skull. Okay, the skull is just the bony part of the head, right, that protects the brain. And you might remember underneath the skull, you're gonna have 3 layers of the meninges. Does anybody remember the names of the 3 layers, starting from the most superficial to the deepest? Okay, now might be a good time to look them up. You can type it in the chat box.
Dura mater,
Mhm.
arachnoid mater, and pia mater.
You got it. Okay, very good. So dura mater, which actually are 2 layers that are fused together, right? Okay, but they separate every now and then at different locations. And the separation is here shown by the deep blue here, right? So this deep blue separation is called the dural venous. Let me write it nicer. Venous sinus. Okay, and this is to drain CSF, right? Below the dura mater is the arachnoid. Arachnoid, sorry, I'm missing an N here. N-O-I-D. Arachnoid means spider mater. And the pia mater as well. Okay, so those are the 3 layers of the meninges. The meninges is one of the protection for the CNS. Okay. We have various protection for the CNS, right? Maybe now is a good time to review it as well. I'll type it in chat box as I say them. There is the meninges. Okay, there are the bones such as the skull and the backbone. Okay, backbone is called vertebral column. There we go. What's another protection for the CNS? There's an acronym that goes with it. No, not acronym. Is it acronym? Abbreviation. Sorry, there's a acronym. I think that's what they're called. There's a 3-letter acronym for the thing. What am I talking about, guys? What else protects your central nervous system? That's okay. There is the CSF, right? Cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, this thing is a liquid that you keep on producing by special tissue in the ventricles, right? And it helps your brain to flow. Right, so that's the cerebral spinal fluid. What is another one that protects your brain? It's a three letters that are the same.
The BBB?
The BBB, that's right. What does the BBB stand for? What kind of barrier is it?
The blood-brain barrier.
That's right. Thank you. Blood-brain barrier. Okay, so it keeps harmful stuff that are in the brain, that are in the blood. I'm sorry, keeps them in the blood and prevents them from entering the brain. Okay, so these are the different kinds of protection. And you know, if you didn't remember them, that's okay. It's very understandable. But there is there a chart for this stuff? Yes, there it is. Okay, there is a chart for it. You should fill it in. I'll post the answer after class. Okay, but that's what I was trying to get at. Okay, so those are the protections of the central nervous system, which means, you know, it's the brain and the spinal cord, huh? Both of them together. Okay, so let's see what else we know here. There is an entry point to the lateral ventricle, right? Okay. The whole lateral ventricle is actually much bigger, if you remember. It's like, you know, within each of the hemisphere, right? The brain has two halves, right? We call it the left and right hemisphere. And inside the hemisphere, that's where you're gonna have your lateral ventricle. You don't have to draw this, but like, remember, it looks like a C with a little tail at the end, right? So that's the lateral ventricle right there, the lateral ventricle. But we see a little opening here. Like, so if you stick your hand in there, you're gonna be able to feel the entire cavity. Okay, so that's the lateral ventricle. We have two of them, two lateral ventricles. You see a little bit of like blood vessels here. Right? It was drawn kind of like this cloud-looking structures in the study guide, and that's the choroid plexus, right? If you don't remember what the choroid plexus is, I'll write down for you here. The choroid plexus is a vascular tissue. That means it has a lot of blood vessels that basically makes CSF. So you have choroid plexus in each of the ventricles, not just the lateral ventricles, but you also have them in the third as well as the fourth. So let's see where the third ventricle is. Third ventricle is right here. There's a little oval here with a dot in the center. That's how you know it's the third ventricle. It gets a little bit weird later. You know, you can see the same thing is also called the thalamus, but I'll explain when we get there. Okay, don't get ahead of ourselves here. Okay, there is a triangle thing here. That's the fourth ventricle. And even though it's not labeled, but you kind of see a little bit of spongy stuff here, right? So that's another choroid plexus. And that's what you should be doing, okay? That you should try to find different brain diagrams on Google. Just type in brain diagram, mid-sagittal, right? And then go Google image. And then you look at different brains, you try to identify the parts. That's the only way to get better, right? Even though I won't be able to test you on the labeling specifically. I mean, there will be some labeling questions, okay? But like, again, and this is not your fault or anything, right? Like, it's just the nature of online courses. It's very hard for me to test you on the labels in a meaningful way. Because after all, even if I give you a diagram and put an arrow to it, you can just look at the diagram and then match it up, right? But you know, when you go on to the nursing program or whatever, they will definitely be testing you on these structures. So you know, get a head start, try to familiarize with the structures. And one of the good ways of doing that is to look at multiple diagrams to familiarize yourself with these things, okay? And to use the 3D models that I have provided as well. Okay, how about this one here? How about this one here? Trying to keep my hopes up here. Anybody know what this thing is that connects the third and the fourth ventricle? What is
The
it?
cerebral aqueduct.
That's right. That is the cerebral aqueduct. AQUE duct. Aqueduct. Okay. So I think those are the key things that we have learned so far. Okay, key things that we've learned so far. There are a couple other weird ones that I want to point out, just to help you connect things together. Wild guess. We've learned this already, okay? Not in this unit, but like, you know, earlier on in the course. What do you think that thing might be? Like, why is there a hole here in the middle of nowhere? Why is there an empty space? Hint. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't quite remember what one of those cavity thingies.
Sinus?
Yeah, the cavity thing is the sinuses. That's right. Okay. And this one is the frontal sinus. Again, you don't like, I'm just showing you so that you can put everything together. It's not like I'm going to test you on that necessarily, right? Okay. And we learn about the sinuses in the respiratory system. Okay. Remember when you breathe air in, the air goes into the sinus, which helps you, you know, warms it up, moistens it, and, you know, all those good things. So those are the key things. Now, there are a couple other things that I try to start to bring up to you, and we're gonna of course learn more about them as we go. So there is this big oval thing that you will see that is sitting in front of the fourth ventricle. That is called the pons. The pons. Pons. It's kind of like the root word in French means bridge. Okay, pontus is bridge in French. Okay, so this area forms a bridge that connects different parts of the brain together. And so if you see an oval thing here in front of the fourth ventricle, that's the pons. You have another smaller brain at the back here. This smaller brain is called the cerebellum. Never mind what it does at the moment, but I just want you to kind of start to recognize them in a brain diagram. So the fourth ventricle is sandwiched between the pons at the front and the cerebellum at the back. Pons, cerebellum. In the middle, that's the fourth ventricle. You will always see this little band here. Okay, this little band here in the mid-sagittal brain. It's just on top of the lateral ventricle. It's as if it's wearing like a little hat or something. And that is the corpus callosum. Corpus means a bundle of something, and then callosum. Call, and then O, and then sum. Callosum, corpus callosum. Okay. So that is that. All right, we'll go back to the labeling in a bit.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry.
No worries.
Just under the pituitary gland, is that another sinus or?
Yeah, that is another sinus right here.
Okay.
Yeah, very good. Right, so we have 4 pairs, right, of major sinuses in the head, in the skull. Okay, so the cerebrum, right? Cerebrum, not to be confused with the cerebellum. Cerebellum is at the back. Okay, cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain. It's basically like if I asked you to visualize a brain, that image that you probably have about a brain, that is the cerebrum. Okay, so this whole thing here, that is one healthy looking brain. Right there, that is the cerebrum. Okay? And then the cerebrum has a little brother, which is right here. Cerebellum. Cerebrum, big brain. Cerebrum, tiny brain. Sorry, one more time. Cerebrum, big brain. Cerebellum, small brain. Okay, small brain attached at the back. So you can see the brain is not smooth. Right? A smooth brain is not a good brain. If there are no crevices in it, then it's actually a lot of the neurodegenerative disorder like Alzheimer, Parkinson, Huntington. The brain becomes kind of smooth as the disease progresses because neurons are dying. So we don't want a smooth brain. We want it to be like very bumpy with lots of grooves and lots of bumps. When we have a bump, we say a gyrus. And when we have a groove, we call it a sulcus. Okay, gyrus and sulcus. Gyrus is a bump, and the sulcus is a groove. Okay, gyri is the plural of gyrus, and sulci is the plural of sulcus. A lot of words that ends with US, the plural form is to change it to I, like nucleus, nuclei. So let's talk about the big brain, the cerebrum. What does it do? Well, the cerebrum, it's actually separated into different regions, as you will see. But generally speaking, it is the last place, the last center to receive sensory input. Carry out integration before commanding voluntary motor responses. Now that all sounds very complicated, but it really isn't because we already talked about it. Let's go back a few slides here. Look, when you touch that hot surface, that same example we have been using this whole time, you already know the signal is going to go up through the ascending track, right? So what's the final destination of this signal? It has to end up somewhere. So the final destination is the cerebrum, right? And when it gets to the cerebrum, you're going to analyze that information, and then you're going to decide what the appropriate voluntary motion is. Do you blow on your hand to cool it down? Do you run it down cold water, right? Do you, scream and cry? That might happen if it's a younger kid, right? Okay, so all these things happens in the cerebrum level. So that's what it means by this sentence. It's the last center, it's the last, the final destination to receive the sensory input. That's where all sensory inputs ultimately end up at the cerebrum. Now, depending on what kind of sensory input it is, it will end up at different parts of the brain. Okay, so things related to vision, it's going to end up at the back. Things that relates to sound, it's going to end up at the side. We're going to learn about all that coming up. Okay? But regardless, that's where all the sensory information is going to end up at. That's where the integration, more interneuron is going to process those information before commanding a voluntary motor response. And sometimes the best motor response is not to do anything. Okay. It communicates with and coordinates the activity of other parts of the brain. That sounds self-explanatory. All right, so like if you look at the cerebrum from the top, this is top view, okay? Top view. To be like all proper, you would say like superior view, right, from the top. Then you have two halves of the brain, the left half and the right half. It kind of looks like a butt if you look at the brain from the top. And there's like a deep groove that runs down the middle. And that deep groove is called the longitudinal fissure. A fissure is deeper than a sulcus. Okay, it's like if it's a shallow groove, we say sulcus. If it's very deep, we say a fissure. A fissure. So the two hemispheres are separated by the longitudinal fissure, which is right in the middle. Okay. Now, if you stick the hand in the longitudinal fissure, you're gonna hit the corpus callosum. And remember the corpus callosum that I told you about? Now let's go back a few slides here just to show you one more time. And that's the corpus callosum. Okay, so if you stick your hand down the longitudinal fissure, your fingertips would be hitting the corpus callosum. There's a question here. Is groove same thing as separation? Yeah, a groove is it's some kind of separation. If it's a shallow groove, then it's a sulcus. If it's a deep groove, then they say it's a fissure. They mean the same thing. Can you guys visualize this? Okay, the brain, there's a longitudinal fissure in the middle. Stick your hand in, you will hit. Stick your hand in like this, okay? Like your finger. Oops, where is my cursor? Right there. Stick your hand in like that. Then you will hit the corpus callosum. Okay, corpus callosum. So what is the corpus callosum anyway? What does it do? Well, the corpus callosum, as you can tell, is white, right? So the brain is gray matter on the outside, but white matter on the inside, right? There are exceptions, but generally speaking, you have the gray stuff on the outside and the white stuff in the middle. And you can tell here in this brain here, this is a coronal section, a frontal section. If you cut the brain into front and back, and you're looking at it from the front, you can see the darker brownish color on the outside, right? That's what I'm trying to outline here. That's the gray matter, and then the white matter is in the middle, right? So this here, this line here, that's the longitudinal fissure. And I keep on telling you, if you stick your hand in there, you will eventually hit the corpus callosum. Okay. I know this is very hard to visualize. Okay. Let me see if I can pull up a brain diagram here. In the meantime, do you guys have anything you want to ask me? Sometimes people say, I don't know what to ask. Anything. Okay. Anything. If something doesn't make sense, ask. Just trying to look for the 3D brain here. Okay, nothing at all. That's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
It was the groove and the bump explanation that was a bit confusing. Yes,
Yeah.
but I understand the groove part now. Which part is the bump part?
The bump. Okay, yeah. Give me a second, huh? How do I bring this over? Okay, there we go. So there is the sagittal, sorry, the coronal cut of the brain, okay? So a gyre, you see here, like if you follow my cursor, do you guys see my mouse? Okay, you do. Okay, so here, you see this one bumps up, that's the bump, that's the gyrus. And then if it goes in here, that's the sulcus. And then that's another gyrus here. And then that's another sulcus, another gyrus, and then the sulcus. So basically anytime you have a groove that goes in, that's a sulcus. And then when you come back up the hill, that's gonna be a gyrus. Is that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So look, right? These are sulcus because they are not very deep. Okay? Like if you imagine walking on the surface of the brain, you fall into one of these things, these sulcus, no problem, just gonna climb back up, okay? But look at this thing right in the middle, that's so deep. You fall into that, you're never gonna get out, right? So what is this? What is this deep groove?
The fissure.
That's right, the fissure, right? And you know, if you look at it from the top, okay, look at it from the top. I mean, I only have half a brain here, unfortunately. But it runs all the way, like literally, like it starts right here at the front, the forehead, and it goes all the way to the back. It's really long. It's really long. That's why it's called the longitudinal fissure. Okay? Now I'm gonna say this for the 5th time, because if I say it enough time, hopefully you remember, right? You stick your hand in for real. If you literally stick the hand in the brain, you can even see it in the diagram here, right? You're gonna hit this thing. You're gonna hit the corpus callosum. Okay, so the corpus callosum is a bundle of white matter. What do white matters do? Do they think or do they transmit?
Transmit.
That's right. So the corpus callosum is responsible for transmitting information between the two hemispheres. If your right brain needs to communicate with the left brain, guess what? It has to send the signal through the corpus callosum. All these white matters are basically an extension of those white fibers that goes into each hemisphere, and it allows the two halves of the brain to communicate with each other. The two halves needs to communicate with each other. Just think about something as simple as walking, okay? You know, we don't think much about walking because it's something we do every day, right? But it's a complicated process. If you want to lift your right leg up and then move forward, you actually have to tell your left leg to not move and become stationary, right? So, you know, the right half of the brain has to communicate constantly with the left half to synchronize. Okay, it's your turn to not move, and then now it's my turn to not move. Otherwise, we're gonna stumble, right? So that's one example of why the right half have to communicate with the left half. Okay, so that's gonna go through the corpus callosum. I don't know if I can. Let me try to delete some of these things away. Okay, look. If I cut enough away, you see, that's the corpus callosum. That's the back half of it anyways, right? If I have the full brain, then it's gonna show the full arc, right? I'm sorry, this is really hard to show you, but you see, it's supposed to be the entire thing, right? Okay, but because in the diagram we cut the brain like that, and this spring is facing to the right, and the one I have here is facing to the left. But hopefully you get it. That's just like the lateral band of the corpus callosum, right? But if you look at it from a sagittal view, you see how it branches out.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If you can go back to the slideshow.
Sure.
So is the corpus callosum the whole, or is it like
No,
the
yeah, it's this white
tissue?
band here. Is the white band here, right? And
Okay.
then they, you know, send out the fibers to communicate, right? But you bring out a good point. That's what I was gonna ask next. Okay, what are these two big black gaping holes underneath the corpus callosum? Anybody want to guess what those are? You already know. I already told you. But like, can you make the connection? What are those two holes part of?
Is it a ventricle or something?
Yeah, you answer your own question. Fantastic. That is the lateral ventricle. You can see right here. Look, that's a lateral ventricle. right? That's why it's important for you to play around with these diagrams to see. You see, the lateral ventricle actually forms the whole C-shaped arc, right? That I was telling you about. Okay. This model is available online on eCentennial. Okay, let me see if I can post a link here for you. I'll put it in chat box. Okay, you have to play around with these things to help you, visualize what goes where and so on and so forth. Okay, now take a look here. The lateral ventricle, you have the right one and the left one, and then you go down, there is a third ventricle, right? There's a third ventricle, and you can also see that in this diagram. Look right here. There is your third ventricle. It's a little bit squished up here, but you see part of it anyways. Sorry, there we go. Okay.
Sorry, so the top ones are the first and second, and then the middle nose-looking one is the third.
That's right. But we don't call it the first and second. We just call them like lateral and lateral, right? Lateral ventricles, right? Right and left lateral ventricle. Okay. So over here, right? Again, you see this big gap that I keep on telling you about. You stick your finger in, you can feel it all the way around to form the C-shaped lateral ventricle, right? Okay. Are we together, guys? Any questions? All right. Let me see what else we have to do here. Okay. Let's do a little bit more before we go for a break. So, moving on. Again, if you visualize the brain, we got the big brain, which is the cerebrum, and then the tiny brain, the cerebellum. But let's focus on the big brain for now. Let's focus on the cerebrum. The outer portion of the cerebrum, the outer portion of the brain, is it gray or is it white? Do you remember?
Gray.
It's the gray matter, that's right. And it's gray matter responsible for thinking or for transmitting?
For thinking.
For thinking, exactly, right? So it turns out that gray matter is very, very thin, right? It's just a couple millimeter thick, and it's very, very convoluted. Convoluted just means like, it forms all these bumps and grooves, okay? And this gray layer that's on the outside, we call it the cerebral cortex, okay? Now, let me explain a little bit, okay? Many organs have the outer portion and the inner portion. The outer portion is always called the cortex, and the inner portion is called something else, which we'll not worry about at the moment. Okay? The best way to help you visualize this is to think of a watermelon. Okay, watermelon. If the watermelon is the brain, then the green part, that's the cortex. It's very thin compared to the meat, the red part. The red part here would be the inside, the white matter. Okay, so the cerebral cortex is what makes up it's what consists of the gray matter. That's where all the interneurons are going to be packed in. Remember interneurons, those green ones that I keep on drawing, right? They will receive the sensory information, they will think about what to do, and then they will send out the voluntary motor action, right? So in the cerebral cortex alone, that's like the shell, the outer portion of the brain, there are over 1 billion cell bodies. These are, of course, neuronal cell bodies. And there are regions that are responsible for sensation. When I say sensation, I'm talking about like things that you can feel with your skin. Okay, temperature, pain, pressure. Okay, texture, right? All these things. Voluntary movement. Okay, thought processes that we associate with consciousness. How do we keep ourselves conscious and not slip into a coma or something like that? So all these activities that are happening in the cerebral cortex allows us to perform these function. So this is the different regions of the brain, and I think it's better if we label it together. Okay, so let's go to this study guide diagram. And let's fill in a few things here before we have our break. Okay. So a lot of things that we have to do here. Hopefully you have colors. Okay. Everybody's brain is gonna be a little bit unique. Okay, like the sulcus and the gyrus, like the groove and the bumps, they are kind of like fingerprints. Okay, like your brain is gonna be different than mine. It's gonna be different from other people. But then there are some grooves that are common in all the brains. Right? So there's one right here. That's really, really prominent. Okay, this one right here. That one is what we call the central sulcus. Central sulcus. And we know what a sulcus is. A sulcus is a groove, right? So this separates the frontal and parietal lobe. I'll show you what those are in a bit. Okay, so we have a central sulcus. If you're kind of wondering where the central sulcus is, like you see where I'm wearing my my headphone here, right? That's pretty much where the central sulcus is gonna be. Okay, it's right down the middle. If you look at the brain from the top, you don't have to draw this. Okay, we have another diagram later on. But if you look at the brain from the top, from the top right here, right? So humor me. What is this big groove again? You probably remember by now, right? You can say it in your head. Right? That's the longitudinal fissure, right? And then the central sulcus would be running down like this. Right? This is the front of the head. This is the back. Right? So you have the longitudinal fissure in the middle. Don't draw this. You don't have to. We have a diagram later on. Okay, I'm just trying to show you. And then that would be, so this is longitudinal fissure, and this would be the central sulcus. Looking at the brain from the top. Okay. Hope you can visualize that. And if not, that's where the 3D models are going to be useful for you, right?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The diagram looked different than yours.
What? There are a couple ones though. Are you sure on the right page?
Or
Yeah, I think you might be looking at.
okay, never mind.
That's okay. Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
It's not very organized. My study guide. Sorry.
Okay, never mind. Forget what I said.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's the central sulcus. All right. So your brain has different lobes. These lobes have different functions. Okay, and they're actually named after the bones that are protecting them. So you learn the name of the lobes. You actually will learn the names of the bone as well. Okay, so let's start with this one. This one is at the front. And this one here. I'm just gonna outline it. I don't want to, and you shouldn't color it in, okay? Because we're gonna put some stuff in it later on. Okay, so there it is. This here is the frontal lobe. I'll tell you what it does later. Okay, but let's just label it. Okay, frontal lobe. Okay. If you're like, oh, I forgot about something, you're like, oh, I forgot again, right? You're hitting your frontal lobe. Okay, frontal lobe right here at the front. So the central sulcus separates the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. Okay? Parietal lobe is like this. It's like, oh, I can't believe it. If you do your hand like this, I can't believe it. Then you are touching the frontal, the parietal lobe. Okay, I forgot again. Okay, that's frontal lobe. I can't believe it. That's parietal lobe. Okay? It sounds silly, but you know, it actually can be quite helpful for some people, right? With these ways of memorizing things. Okay, so there it is. The way your brain works is, in terms of memorizing thing, is if you can make a very weird connection, outrageous example, your brain is more likely to remember it. Okay, but it's different for everybody. You might need to come up with your own example of how to remember it. So that is the parietal lobe. Okay. There is another groove right here. There's another groove here. The grooves are kind of like the boundaries, right? The border of a country, if you would, right? So that is B right here is called the lateral fissure. I guess is deeper than the other ones. That's why it's called a fissure. Sometimes they still also call it lateral sulcus. It just depends on the textbook and the diagram. Okay. Again, the key thing is it means the same thing. So this one, you can probably guess it separates the frontal lobe with the temporal lobe. Okay. Sorry, let me try to write that better. Temporal, M-P-O-R-A-L, temporal lobe. Okay, let's use a different one here. Temporal lobe. Okay. Some people are like, oh, I got a headache. I gotta rub my temple. That's where the temporal lobe is. Temporal lobe. Okay, around here. Okay, there is another fissure here, but you know they don't have a label, so let's forget about it. But we do have another lobe at the back. Okay. So how many lobes do we have in total? It's a trick question. Anybody know how many lobes we have?
4.
Yeah, we see 4 here, right? Yeah. But there is a 5th one that's hidden. Okay. If again, I keep on telling you to stick your hand into different parts. If you stick your hand into the lateral fissure, you're gonna hit the 5th lobe. Okay, I'm gonna show you later on. Okay, the 5th lobe is called the insular lobe, and that's where you will process information like taste. So we'll learn about taste next week. So 4 lobes here on this diagram, a 5th one hiding behind. I can show you briefly with the 3D model. Okay, you see here? That's the parietal lobe here. Okay, this is the temporal lobe. And if you stick your hand in, you see that's the 5th lobe. Insula. You can't really see it because it's covered up. But there's a groove here, right? That's the lateral sulcus, right? Okay, lateral fissure. Couple more things, and then we'll have a break. If you think about the brain, we got the big brain. Big brain is cerebrum. And we also have a little brain, remember? The little brain. What is the name of the little brain? Anybody remember?
Cerebellum.
That's right. That is the cerebellum, which is right here. Okay, right here at the back. Oh, that's not the color I want. Okay, I know you're thinking, why does the color matter? Because for some reason they always use brown for the cerebellum in all the diagrams. Okay, I couldn't really find the brown that I want, but there it is at the back. Cerebellum. I have not told you what it does yet. Okay, I just want you to recognize where it is. Okay, there is a little thing here that's kind of tucked in here. The whole thing is like that. Okay, but it's hidden behind the temporal lobe. What is that? Anybody remember? Little oval thing in front of the fourth ventricle. It means bridge. Anybody?
Pons.
The
Pons.
pons. That's right. Very good, Mix. Pons. Okay. Again, normally it's like that, right? But you can't see it because everything is covered up. Let me show you the interactive 3D model. There you go. That's the pons right here. Okay. Again, some of it got cut off. That's why we can't really see it. And then below the pons, that's the medulla oblongata. Right? We learned about the medulla oblongata before, right? In the respiratory system. Medulla oblongata. That's where your respiratory center is. Right? It detects the amount of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream and then it makes you breathe. Okay. So there's going to be the base of your skull. You don't have to draw this necessarily, but there is a hole at the bottom of your skull. That's where the brain is going to come out. That's where the medulla oblongata is going to come out. And then it's going to become the spinal cord. Okay, so this is the skull. Okay, base of skull. All right, let's take a break. When we return, we're gonna add more details to this diagram. Okay, let's just take 5. Okay, let's not be gone for too long. So 53, okay, 9:53. See you in a bit. All right, let's get back to it. So, now that we know where all the lobes are, what exactly do they do? Well, let's start with the easy ones, okay? Like, of course, each lobe has that you can break it down into very fine details, and give you a very comprehensive list of what exactly it does. But this is an introductory course, and even though it's introductory, I'm sure you agree it's already a lot of information, right? So I'm gonna just try to give you 1 or 2 main things that the lobe does, right? So for example, the occipital lobe at the back, occipital lobe in the back, that is responsible for vision. Okay, so we say visual information. Visual information. Right. So it processes information related to things you see. And it's actually more complicated than that. Not only you are seeing things like on the road when you're driving, that's an example, but also like if you see someone in the hallway and you recognize their face, that actually happens in the occipital lobe as well. Okay, as we'll see, you actually would take the face and then you match it with all the faces that you've ever seen, all right, and that you remember, and then you're like, hey, is there a match? Do I know this person or not? Okay, recalling the
Excuse me,
yeah, sorry.
I have a question. Is it separated left to right, like eyes left to right?
Okay, that is a very good question. We will learn that next week, but short answer, no. Okay, this is a situation where each of the eyes will send information to both halves of the brain. I actually have a very detailed note on that for you guys next week. Okay, but good question. All right, so vision at the back, huh? All right. What about temporal lobe? Temporal lobe is for smell. Smell. And hearing. Okay, they have like fancy names for these things. All right? So smell is olfactory. Olfactory information. Hearing is auditory. Auditory information. So these things goes to the temporal lobe. So like your nose is here. When you smell something, it goes right to the temporal lobe. Okay. Where are your ears? Like roughly here, right? That's the ear. So when you hear things, it goes directly to your temporal lobe. Okay, so those are the easy ones. Questions before I tell you the crazy ones? All right. So in the frontal lobe, that is where like a lot of the complicated stuff is going to be happening in the frontal lobe. Complicated as in like things that we associated with humans, okay? Things that are kind of unique to humans. Okay? So let me just hold on. Let me just write this down for you, but I gotta oh, there we go. I just need more space, that's all. Okay. So for example, in the frontal lobe, that's where you're gonna have higher order thinking. Higher order thinking. Okay. So like, you know, calculations. Right? Abstract. Right? These are higher order thinking. Being able to assess action and consequences. That's an abstract thinking, right? So that happens in the frontal lobe. What else is like complicated for humans? Like anything that you can think of that you might think is kind of like unique to humans, and you know, therefore happens in the frontal lobe.
Driving?
What's that? Oh, driving. Yeah, oh, yeah, sure. Okay. I'm gonna rewrite that in a bit. Yeah. But like in terms of like other things that are abstract, I guess it's hard to guess what I'm thinking about, right? Personality. Okay, if you damage the frontal lobe, your personality can change. I'll give you an example of that later on. Speech. Okay, voluntary movement. Right, so you talk about like driving, right? Okay, so that's voluntary movement, controlling of your body parts. Okay, so that's all going to be happening in the frontal lobe. Now, like I said, each of the lobes have sub-regions inside, and they're going to be doing like different things. I know I'm not gonna, I know I told you I'm not gonna, you know, break it down too much for you, but there are like a few of these regions that are very important for you to know, okay? Because you know the people always talk about it. Let me just find the right color. So at the back here of the frontal lobe, there is a bump, a gyrus. Okay, that is very important. Okay. So this area here is called the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus. There is the central sulcus, which is the black line that separates the frontal and the parietal lobe. So the gyrus, the bump that's in front of the central sulcus is called the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus. So I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about the precentral gyrus. The precentral gyrus, this strip of brain tissue, contains the primary motor cortex, which enables voluntary movement. Just copy it down first, I will explain. Okay, so the precentral gyrus, that's like a location on the brain. Whereas the primary motor cortex, it's a functional area that is located within the precentral gyrus. This might help you understand a little bit, okay? Like, if you think about Scarborough, Scarborough is a big area, right? So within this area, you have Centennial College. Okay, so the college is like a functional structure, right? A school, essentially, that is found in the Scarborough area. So the primary motor cortex, it's like the college. It's a functional thing designated for a particular purpose. Where do you find the primary motor cortex? On the precentral gyrus. This area, this strip of brain tissue that is in front of the central sulcus. Questions? Okay. Here, I'll tell you what it means in a bit, okay? It will make more sense after we label this second part here. You can probably guess. If there is a precentral gyrus, there's probably another thing here, right? And if you have to guess the name, I'm pretty sure you will get it right. This is going to be the post-central gyrus. Gyrus is a bump. This is a bump that is behind the central sulcus. So central sulcus, the groove, and then you have a precentral gyrus and a post-central gyrus. And I'll write it down for you first, and then I will explain. Okay, trust me. As soon as I explain it, it will make perfect sense. Okay, this one contains the what does it contain? It contains the primary somatosensory cortex, which allows sensation from skin. I'm going to say and muscle, okay? Okay, so copy it down, and I'll explain to you what it means.
From skin and what, please?
Skin and muscle, sorry. Skin and muscle. Can I move on? Anybody need a little bit more time? Okay, You don't have to go back with me. You can just watch. Or you know, if you have this on a physical copy, you can flip back. Okay, let's go back to this diagram. All right, so we can yeah, you know, actually, you know, we can add something to it together if you want. So the story that I've been telling you forever is you touch a hot surface accidentally. Information goes, you know, travels up the hand through the sensory neuron, afferent pathway, enters at the back of your spinal cord. You're gonna complete the spinal reflex here, but at the same time, it's gonna go up, right? It's gonna go up to the brain. It's gonna cross over the middle. This is the middle, right? This is the middle. Okay, so you're gonna cross over at the medulla oblongata. Talk about that later. But ultimately, it goes to the brain. But where to the brain? Well, now we know, instead of saying to brain, we're gonna say the sensory information arrives at the primary. I don't know if you have been paying attention to the color I use. I try to color code everything so it agrees with each other. So sensory information arrives at the primary somatosensory cortex, right? Which is like behind the central sulcus, right? That's where you'll be able to process these sensations. Oh, it's hot. Oh, it hurts. Okay. Oh, it's sharp. Right? So that's where the processing information is going to happen. Then it communicates with the primary motor cortex. Okay. So voluntary response, voluntary motor response, like, you know, blowing on your hand, running it down the cold water, running the hand down under cold water. The voluntary motor response is initiated from the primary motor cortex. And the information goes back down the descending track, usually at the front of the spinal cord, and then it exits at the appropriate section so that it can affect the effector, right? So I hope it's coming together. All right, it's not possible to learn all of this, you know, at the same time. But as we learn more bits and pieces of information, we try to put them together. We try to see the big picture. Questions? Okay, I guess I nailed it. Let's go back to here. Okay, so what does the parietal lobe do? Well, the parietal lobe basically is going to process somatosensory. Somato means bodily, okay? Somatosensory information. And you know, I have been repeating this quite a bit, like temperature, texture, pain, okay, pressure, everything you can feel with your hand, with your skin, with your muscle. And we're not quite done with this diagram yet. We're gonna add two more things later on. It doesn't make sense to add them now. I have to show you the slides first. But one more thing here. The primary motor cortex and the primary somatosensory cortex, they are actually zoned and mapped to different part of the body. What that means is like over here, around this area, that area is dedicated. Hold on, it's way too much stuff here. It's not responding. Okay, there we go. Okay, that area here, that is dedicated to the hand. It's dedicated to the hand. And then further down, it's dedicated to the face. You don't have to memorize it. I'm just giving you examples. So if you touch the hot surface, it goes all the way, and it's gonna end up like right here. Right here. Can you guys see my cursor? Let me see. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's gonna end up right here in this part. Then it's gonna communicate with the part that controls the hand, and then it's gonna go back down, right? So I want to ask you, like, does this part here where my arrow is that gonna process feeling from your right hand or left hand? Help me out here, please. Let's do a poll. Let's see what you guys think. My question is, does that, like this part right here, right? This part right here. Is it gonna process the right hand or left hand? If you think it's right, please choose A. If you think it's left, please choose B.
What side of the head are we looking at? The left side or the right side?
That is a great question. You should be able to tell just by looking at the diagram here.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. Not as good as I thought it would be. But this is the left hemisphere that we're looking at. Okay, left side of the brain. Because you can see the person's head, right? Okay, facing the left side here. And so it's gonna be the right side. Right? Remember, the left brain is gonna feel and control the right half of the body, right? For the most part, and vice versa. Because on the way up, remember the ascending track on the way up, it crosses the middle, right? Same thing, on the way down, it's gonna cross the middle at the medulla oblongata. Okay. Now, listen to me. There will be some questions like this on the test, which is gonna come later on, okay? So let's say, and you don't have to draw this on your diagram, just listen. Let's say someone has a stroke and it damaged that part. What's gonna happen? Anybody wanna take a wild guess?
Droopy right face.
Droopy right face, okay. Care to elaborate a little bit?
Like for the first sign, like the right side of the face is gonna be droopy, or there's gonna be problems moving and using the right side of the face.
Can you feel the face though?
No sensations.
Okay, interesting. Okay, back to Madison. What do you think? Do you think you can feel the right face? Not you, like, but then the person. Do you think they can feel the right face?
I don't think they'll have full movement and not have much sensation.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, they can feel the right side of the face, but the left side of the face will be paralyzed.
Oh, okay. Also interesting. All of you have so far, right? All the three answers that I hear, it's partly correct. There's some parts that are true and some part that is not quite correct. Anyone else wanna, take a shot at this? If you damage where the X is, okay, if the person has a stroke that damaged that part of the brain, what's gonna happen? Which side of the face are we gonna have problem with, and what kind of problem are we gonna have?
Right face has no movement or any sensations.
Okay, yeah. Anyone else? Come on, tell me what you think. I want to know. Okay. The red part, pink part. The pink part is for movement. The blue part is for sensation. If you only damage the red part, then, and this is the left brain, right? Then the person will not be able to move the right half of the face. That's why it's the droopy, right? As medicine was saying. But they can feel it just fine. You touch them with a cold hand, they can feel the cold. They just can't respond to it. Okay? Because the sensation part, the somatosensory cortex is not damaged, right? No damage in the blue part. Only damage with the red part. So feeling is not a problem. Movement is a problem. Is that clear? On the other hand, if you damage the blue part and not like if the damage is right here, then you can't feel the face, but you can move the face. Okay, no feeling, but I can move it just fine. No droopy face, you can, fake a smile and stuff like that. Questions? Yeah, like paralyzed. You have no voluntary control over the face, I should say. Okay, it's possible for people who have paralysis that their reflex path is still intact. Yeah, the reflex path is still intact. So like you cannot voluntarily move the muscle, but if it's part of a reflex, then it's still going to be able to move. I'll give you an example. Okay, like some of you know who Stephen Hawking is, right? Okay, the famous physicist. He's basically paralyzed because of ALS. Right? So if you watch some of his videos, even though he doesn't have voluntary control of his body, but sometimes you see that he seems to be smiling. Right? Like when people say something to him in response, he smiles. That is like a genuine smile. Right? Like we all smile. Sometimes we fake a smile to be polite, right? So faking a smile is a voluntary action. Okay? It requires the motor cortex to be functioning on its own. Okay, but if someone tells you something that you genuinely find funny and then you laugh about it, then that's kind of like a reflex. It's like a response, right? And that doesn't require voluntary input, right? So it's possible for someone to not be able to have voluntary movement, not to be having voluntary control of a particular body part, but if it's a part of a reflex, that muscle can still move. Okay. I don't know if that answered your question or like I totally went on a tangent there. All right. So that's that. Let's go back to the picture here. Okay, that's everything we've labeled, just with a lot more information, of course. But there is this diagram. Okay, it's called the I think it's pronounced homunculus man. Okay, which translates to like a little man. Okay? So this little man is a very famous drawing, a depiction of what we look like to our brain. And the body part size is proportional to the number of neurons that are going to and coming from those body parts. Okay, so not surprisingly, the hands are like super big because we have very fine control of our hands, right? And we can feel things very in great details with the hands, right? And so it's really big. It has a lot of neurons going to there and coming from there. We don't really, feel much with our back here. Not like, fine detailed feelings that we would have with the hand. And so, that part of the body is relatively small. And so if you take a look at the brain, now it's important to realize that this brain, this is the front, huh? This is the front. So this is the central sulcus right here. And in front of the central sulcus, if you take the slice of the brain out, that's basically where the primary motor cortex is. And as I was trying to tell you on the diagram, like you're gonna have your face here, you're gonna have the hand here, Okay, you're gonna have the tongue here. All right, and then the leg is kind of dangling in the longitudinal fissure. All right, so each part is mapped to a particular body. All right, so like if you damage here, you cannot move the hand. If you damage here, you cannot move the face. If you damage here, you cannot move half the tongue, right, so to speak, right? Okay, damage here, you cannot move the leg, right? So that's what it is. And you know, we have a lot of neurons going to the hand, a lot of neurons going to the lower lips. Okay, relatively a lot going to the eyes and the ears, but not a lot in the trunk. Okay, in the trunk or in the feet. Okay, so this is an experiment you can try with someone at home to illustrate this. You can take two sharp pencil or pen. Okay, you tell the other person to close their eyes, and you know you're gonna poke the person's fingertip with either one pen, or you're gonna poke them with two pens, like really close together like that. Okay, and you're gonna ask the person to tell you, am I poking you with one or two pens? If you do it at the fingertips, okay, they will always be able to tell whether it's one or two. Even if you try to do it very close together, they will be able to tell you that you're using two pen and not one. Okay? But if you try to do the same thing, but at the lower back, right, you poke them at the back and lift up their shirt a little bit, poke them with one pen or two pens, they can't tell. They can't tell. They will just be guessing. Okay, and this illustrates the point I'm trying to make here. Right? You have a lot more neurons, a lot more sensitivity at the fingertips than you do at the back. Right? So you have more higher definition, if you would, in terms of the kind of things that you can feel. Okay, so there's this story I read. This I read it a while back. Okay, so in Hong Kong, this is where I was born, where I grew up. To go into university and colleges, you have to write a public entrance exam. Okay, and there is this girl who scored top 5% of everybody who participated in the test for that year, right? And what's remarkable about the story, and you can check it out yourself, it's that she actually was born blind and severely hearing impairment. Okay? So how do blind people read? Well, they have to read the braille, right, with the hands usually. But her condition also caused her sensation from the fingers to be not as sensitive. So she was really having trouble with the hand braille. And so she found that reading with her lips actually was more efficient. Okay? So she taught herself how to read the braille using the lower lips. And you can see from the homunculus man here that we do have a lot of neurons going to the lower lips. Okay? It's almost comparable to those of the hand. So quite a remarkable story, and quite interesting as well. So are we good with this diagram? You understand what the little man here represents, and you understand like these slices that we are taking out? Any follow-up questions? Okay, well, that's good, I suppose. Okay, so the primary motor cortex, it's everything I told you already, but written out for you. It's located in the frontal lobe, just in front of the central sulcus. Voluntary commands to skeletal muscle begins in the primary motor cortex. So not everything is part of a reflex. Okay, I can voluntarily move my right hand up. Okay, I'm controlling this right now. Okay, I'm not moving my hand because of some reflex. So to initiate some kind of voluntary movement, it would start, to move my right hand, it would start on my left primary motor cortex. Okay, to move my left fingers, it would start on the right primary motor cortex. Okay? So each part of the body is controlled by a certain section on the primary motor cortex. If I have to move the leg, it would have to start from, closer to the up here, a longitudinal fissure. The hand, the face, the tongue, so on and so forth. Right? So unless you damage the whole thing, then you have complete paralysis of that side. But if it's a stroke that affects a particular area, only that section will be affected. And the right primary motor cortex control the left side of the body, vice versa. The primary somatosensory cortex, it's located in the parietal lobe, just behind posterior the central sulcus. We label it already. And just like the motor cortex is zoned into different sections, but it's not for movement here. Okay, this is for feelings from skin, from muscle. Okay? And often the two communicate with each other, especially, you know, in terms of determining what to do with certain information. Okay, like I see the squirrel crossing the street. Okay, I gotta press on the brake. I gotta turn the wheels. I gotta, you know, do this and that. All right. Now, in each lobe, there are designated association area. I'm not gonna show you where it is in each lobe. Okay? It's like too much information, but I'm gonna tell you what it actually does. And I know, you know, it's all written out here, but basically, association area is a dedicated region where you will basically take a particular information related to a particular sense, and then you analyze it and you compare with your memory to see if you've seen that before or heard that before. And if you haven't, then you might create a new memory for it. Okay, so let me give you an example to help you understand. What does the auditory association area do? Well, you know, if you're in a room, you know, just having a party with other people, and everybody have their cell phone out, okay, and then you hear the phone goes off. Yeah, you hear a ringtone, right? So that ringtone goes into your ear, and then in the auditory association area, you're like, huh, that ringtone. Do I know that ringtone? Is that my ringtone? Right? So you compare with the memory of your own ringtone, right? And you're like, oh, that's my ringtone, that's my phone. Okay, I gotta pick it up. So that's an example of auditory association area, right? There are some sounds that we are all familiar with, right? If you take the TTC, like the subway, you know that sound that they make when they, you know, try to make an announcement. Okay, when the TTC is arriving, right? You hear that TTC, the chime, right? That the door is closing. Okay, you recognize that. So that's, you know, again, auditory association. You recognize people's voice. Okay, is that a voice that, you know, that I have heard of? So for example, right, like I have not met like 90% of you. I don't know what you look like. You know, I see you in the hallway. I wouldn't even know it's you. But, you know, I've come to recognize some of your voices. Right? So like even without looking at who's turning on the mic, I can see like, oh, okay, yeah, I recognize that voice. So every time you guys talk, my auditory association area is going to match that voice with the voices that I know. If it's someone that I never heard of before, okay, then I try to create a memory for it, right? So next time I hear it again, you know, maybe I'll recognize it again. Do you understand? Right? So it's very simple. For visual association area, same thing, but it's for visual information, right? Like I walk down the hallway at school, I see lots of students. Right? Like subconsciously, my brain might be scanning all the faces. Like, oh, I don't know who they are. I haven't met that before. I haven't met that one before. And then I see an old student that I had last semester. It's like, oh, okay. The visual association area is going to take that face, match it with all the faces that I know. Right? And I'm like, oh, I know that person. I should say hi. Okay? Whether the name appears or not, that's a different story. Okay, names are stored somewhere else in the brain. Okay, but at least I will recognize the face, and that's the problem. Like usually, I remember people for up to a semester, but after that, I still recognize them, but then I don't remember the name usually. Okay. I hope that makes sense. An example of somatosensory association area would be like if I blindfold you and then I ask you to touch different things, okay? Like I give you a brake to touch, you touch it, you probably know you're touching a brake without even seeing it, okay, or anything. Because that kind of texture, right? You felt that texture before. Like I know what a brake feels like. I know, you know, what you know, foil paper feels like. So all those sensory feelings that you had encountered in your life, it's stored somewhere in the somatosensory association area. Okay? All right. quickly, polls. Go, go, go. Okay, not bad. That auditory sound, your ear is here. This is the temporal lobe. Okay, like you rub your temple when you have a headache. Temporal lobe. The answer is B. How about this one? You know, this is the unit where it's very useful to have cue cards. Okay, put the brain part on one side and then the function on the other, and just carry it with you wherever you go. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you. Correct answer is the corpus callosum. That's the bundle of white matter that allows the two halves of the brain to communicate. Okay. Sometimes people with certain form of epilepsy. Epilepsy is basically uncontrolled firing of the neuron, right? That would result in the seizure. So in certain kind of epilepsy where the uncontrolled firing happens in both sides of the brain, they sometimes perform a surgery to cut 3/4 of the corpus callosum. Okay, and that sounds very scary. The first time reading it, I was like, what? But apparently, if you cut it, it significantly improve the condition. Okay, they have drastic reduction in seizure with very little side effect. Okay, that is really hard for me to believe. Like cutting 3/4 of a structure that allows two halves of the brain to communicate actually doesn't have too much side effect. Right? You can look it up if you are interested. All right, I have two additional area in the brains that I want to tell you about. Okay, there is something called the Broca's area, and there's something called the Wernicke's area. Okay. Broca's and Wernicke's area. I'll tell you what they do, and then we'll label it together. So the Broca's area is also called the motor speech area, and it's usually on the left side only. It's not on both sides. For most people, it's on the left side. Now, how do people know, where the brain parts are, like, and what do they do? A lot of it has to do with studying people who have brain damage, and then understanding what function is being affected, and then they can guess, what that part of the brain does. Right? So if a person damaged the left frontal lobe and then they have trouble producing good sensible speech, then we know that part of the brain is responsible for speech. But there is also something called functional MRI. Functional MRI, you guys know MRI, right? Magnetic resonance imaging. You go into this gigantic machine that basically use magnetic fields to look at the inside of the body. They could do something called functional MRI to scan the brain, and they will ask you to do different things while they scan the brain. They're like, recite a poem, and then they will see which part of the brain lights up, and that's how they know what part of the brain does what. Have you guys ever heard this saying that you only use whatever, like 10% of your brain or something like that? Do you guys think that's true?
No.
No? Yeah. that sounds like fictional, right? But yeah, you're right. Okay, it's not. We use a lot of the brain parts like all the time. Even when you're sleeping, right? We're using 80%, 90% of the brain at the time, and people know because they do functional MRI. They scan the brain. Okay. So anyway, back to this Broca's area. This is where you are able to produce articulate speech in a clear and fluent manner. Okay, I'm talking about like your native language, right? It's not like, you try to speak a second language and you're not familiar with the syntax, and that's why it's not clear or fluent. I'm talking about like your mother tongue, right? They call it. Okay, so that requires the Broca's area, and it communicates with the primary motor cortex. Okay, and coordinate with the respiratory and oral movement that produce speech. In English, for example, the pronunciation of certain words depends on how you position your tongue and your lips, right? So for example, like if you have to say these words, right? Like if you really try to enunciate them and you think about how your lips have to be. So for example, the first one, you have to say va, 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 right? Like your top teeth kind of have to bite down on your lower lips to say it, right? Va, and then la, 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 you have to move your tongue, right? And sa, 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 ma, 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 right? So all these things, if we have to pronounce it, you actually have to move the tongue and you have to move the lips and position them in different ways. All those voluntary movement comes from the primary motor cortex. So the motor speech area, the Broca's area, has to communicate with that and to make sure that you are producing articulate speech. So when a person damages the Broca's area, they have what's called Broca's aphasia, okay, or expressive aphasia. This interferes with the person's ability to speak fluently and in proper manner. And so they might be using the wrong words in the wrong context. They might be having a lot of pauses, and you would just generally have a hard time understanding it. I did have one student a long time ago that told me that she has a family member that actually have this condition, and they say at the beginning it's not something that you just have all of a sudden. Like it's like a progressive condition, right? Okay, in some cases, and so what happens is it gets harder and harder to understand what the person is trying to say over time. But eventually, when the disease is like fully progressive, they learn to understand what he meant. Okay, so like when they say, I don't know, like they say grab a banana when you go outside, okay, then they know what he really mean is like, grab an umbrella, okay, because it's raining outside. So like, you learn to understand this new way of the person speaking, but to a stranger, right, it wouldn't make any sense. So there is, here's a transcript of someone who has Broca's aphasia, and they were asking the person to describe the picture. And you can read the transcript here. It's very broken up. The thoughts are kind of everywhere, and sometimes they would have trouble looking for the right word, right? Like 2 cups of coffee or empty, like they just really not be able to identify the right word for the context. Okay, so that's Broca's aphasia. And again, the Broca's area is responsible for fluent articulate speech, whereas the Wernicke area is for also located on the left side of the brain, and it's responsible for helping you to understand spoken languages. Like you hopefully you're understanding what I'm saying, but partly it's because of your Wernicke's area. It's taking the words and trying to make sense of it, right? Not only is it responsible for understanding spoken words, but also written words. Okay, so if you damage the Wernicke's area, there is Wernicke's aphasia or receptive aphasia. So in Broca's aphasia, you have trouble expressing yourself. And over here, you have trouble understanding what people are trying to, communicate with you. So together, the two areas, they work together to allow communication in humans. So let's just put them on our diagram here. We have the right here, left side. That is the Broca's area. For articulate speech. And we have the Wernicke's area. Oops.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Is this attributed to stammering as well?
Is it attributed to what? I'm sorry. To
stammering.
Like stuttering?
Yes.
Oh, not entirely. I actually don't know what contributes to stuttering, but stuttering can be corrected. Okay, stuttering can be corrected. And you know, if it's something like a permanent damage to the Broca's area, that cannot be corrected, right? So based on that, I don't think it's entirely related to the Broca's area, but you know, maybe we could Google and find out. Sorry. All
I have
right,
a
so
quick question.
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Is there like landmarks we can look for to identify the areas?
The Broca's area?
Yeah, both.
Broca is kind of right in front of the bottom of the precentral gyrus. It's also on top of the lateral fissure, if you would. Wernicke's area is, you know, if you think of the temporal lobe as a piece of land, okay, the Wernicke's area would be in the northeast region. Okay, top right. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's how I visualize it myself. Okay. All right, last slide, and then we're gonna let you go. Fiennes Gage. I don't know if you have heard this man before. Any of you take psych class, psychology? You might have heard of this in psych class. Yeah. Did you guys talk about this person in psychology?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So like, you know, here's my version of it. For those of you who didn't know, he was worked like a railway worker. Okay. You know, I forgot where and when. Okay, but what happens is one day there was an explosion accident that causes a pipe to basically shoot up his face like this, and then it comes out on the other side. Okay? And that's what the skull looks like. Surprisingly, he survived the accident. The pipe never came out. Okay, and it's just kind of stuck in there. The doctors decided that it was safer to leave the pipe in than to remove it, because if they remove it, he's likely going to bleed out and die, right? So they left the pipe in there. But what's remarkable about this story is his personality completely changed after the accident. Okay, and as you can see in this picture, the pipe actually damaged his frontal lobe. And that's how they eventually realized the frontal lobe, amongst other things, is responsible for personality. Okay, so the fact that his personality become completely different before and after the accident kind of supported that that idea. So you can look him up for more detailed information if you're interested in it. His skull is actually preserved, and it's on display in some museum, I believe. Again, I don't remember where, but it's something that you can look up if you're interested in this. So that is that for now. I think we'll wrap this up on Wednesday. We still have quite a long way to go. And I think we are on schedule, right? Next week we will start on the sensory organs. But for now, that's it. Make sure you do your quiz on Wednesday, and I'll see you then. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.